a lot of the recipes we teach and, so much of what we work with, so much of what people consider to be part of this region's cuisine, the recipes sort of have this theme of scarcity, and it's like you make what you can with very little. But farmer's cheese is a bit of an exception because it results from this entirely other issue, and that is kind of this blessing of abundance.
It seems like a blessing,
Yeah.
to have a lot of something, but when you have a lot of something, you still have to do something with it before it goes bad. And I'm thinking zucchini.
Yeah, for sure.
In
That's
the summer garden.
Yeah. Blessing of abundance can still be a lot of work. Right?
Yeah, double-edged sword.
Yeah. Something that we have often in abundance is milk. We will typically have some milk on hand for certain recipes. I'm thinking mostly of baking, pastry kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, we almost always have at least a little bit left over. So what do we typically do when we have milk left over and we don't want it to go to waste? Well, we make farmer's cheese.
Farmer's cheese, yep.
Farmer's cheese was once a lot more common here in this part of the world. But you could say the same thing for a lot of other places. I mean, actually, in a lot of other places, it is still very common. Basically, wherever people keep dairy animals, there are cheese-making traditions. And in addition to all these fermented cheeses, you will probably find at least some version of this quick, fresh, and unfermented cheese. So in this area, when there were, a lot more small subsistence farms and family farmsteads around, and families would keep dairy animals, they might be milking twice a day if they had cows, and, that often meant that they ended up with extra milk. So, with that sort of waste-free ethos, that is how farmer's cheese became very traditional here in West Virginia and in Appalachia.
Mm-hmm. And we both have dairy farming heritage in our families.
Mm-hmm.
My great-grandparents had a dairy just not even a mile or so down the road from our farm here.
And my great-great-grandparents were dairy farmers from Switzerland. And they continued that tradition when they settled here. They settled in the little village of Helvetia in Randolph County.
Mm-hmm.
Neither one of us really have any, family lore or compelling stories necessarily about farmer's cheese. But every time we make it, every time we put it on the plate, it still gives us a chance to connect with and talk about this part of our common heritage, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. If you make a fermented cheese, you need a lot of milk, but you'll also need a place to store it long term and time to wait. But farmer's cheese is made really quickly, just a few minutes, and it only keeps for about a week or so, but it's really pretty versatile in the kitchen.
So versatile, yeah.
It can be crumbled, it can be kept soft and spread on bread or in baking desserts, and it can also be hardened for slicing. So there's lots of possibilities.
Yeah. And because it's so simple, just so easy to make, farmer's cheese shows up in so many places, all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
We have a friend from Poland who's come here, eaten our farmer's cheese, and said, this is exactly what we have back home. Our farmer's cheese is identical. There's queso fresco in Latin America, virtually the same thing.
Yeah, and even paneer that you would find in India is a similar process.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes people in Appalachia try to make these claims about foods that they are or are not Appalachian enough based on, whether or not they are uniquely Appalachian. And I think that's a shame because I think there is so much beauty in the way that food that we make here connects us to all these places all over the world. And in a way, farmer's cheese does that because you know, farmer's cheese, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Lost Creek Farm Kitchen. It has been a little while here and it is so good to see you again.
Yeah, today we're excited to show you how to make a simple and versatile farmer's cheese.
Yeah, this is a recipe that we make throughout the year, but it's very, very nice in these summer months when we have a lot of fresh vegetables from the garden and we pair it with that. And we're actually going to show you a little bit later a few ways that we transform this basic recipe to do just that, to pair it with a bunch of different stuff in a bunch of different ways. But first, let's dig into this most basic farmer's cheese recipe. First, maybe let's talk a little bit about the equipment that we'll need for this, huh?
Yeah, so you don't need that much. You will need a medium saucepan, and you'll need a medium-sized mixing bowl. It's nice if you have a fine mesh strainer. If you do, you would want one that would set over your bowl and have a little bit of a gap at the bottom to let the curds drain. If you don't have that, or even if you do, it's nice to have a fine woven towel. This is something that we will use to help strain the curds and make a firmer cheese. If you use the towel, you'll want something to kind of tie it off and keep it tight. We'll show you how to do this later. We use a clothespin. You can also use a twisty or piece of string. A wooden spoon is nice. What would be even better is if you had kind of like a wooden spatula with a flat edge. That just covers more surface area on the bottom of the pot to help you avoid a scorch. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much it. Do you want to tell them the few ingredients that we need?
Yeah, very few ingredients. We are making this recipe today with 3 things. Of course, we're making cheese, so we need milk, right? So the recipe that we are going to walk through uses only 1 quart of milk. We're feeling a little bit frisky today, plus we want to show you a couple different ways to use this recipe. So Amy and I are going to end up making 2 batches, but for what we're going to show you today, just 1 quart of milk. We have some salt on hand, and to curdle the milk to make the cheese, you need some kind of acid, so we are using apple cider vinegar today. Now you can use other things. White vinegar is totally acceptable. We'll use that sometimes. I know some people who make this cheese with lemon juice. So that's it.
So first thing is we'll go ahead and we'll get a burner over here. You'll probably just use your stovetop. We're going to use a burner for this demo purpose.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and pour the quart of milk into this saucepan. Okay, so I'm going to start the stove. I'm going to try to, we are bringing the milk to a boil, but we're going to do so over about medium heat.
Okay, so we'll put the milk onto the burner.
Yeah, so I am just going to start stirring immediately here, and basically I'm not going to stop.
Yeah, you want the milk to come up to a boil with a uniform temperature, so you want to keep moving that hot milk from the bottom up into the rest of it to keep a consistent temperature throughout.
Anytime you're cooking milk, especially cooking it at a heat that is high enough to bring it to a boil, you run this risk of scorching. So we have a few pointers that we can offer up to help you mitigate this risk of scorching your milk. The first one has to do with the pot that you use, and it is very important, right, to use a thick bottom pot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you want to use a pot with a nice thick bottom because that will distribute the heat evenly throughout the bottom. If you have a real thin bottomed pot, where the flame will get extra hot, and then the other areas won't be as hot, and it'll easily scorch.
Some people will put just a little bit of water in the bottom of the pan before you put the milk in. But I think the most important is just to kind of keep stirring it. Take your time, going faster through this step doesn't make it any better. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing a little bit of bubbling. We want to see more bubbling. We want to sort of start to see it, bubble rapidly. We want to see that boil, but this is a good sign that we are getting there. So there we go. It's a boiling.
So we'll turn that heat off. Whenever it starts to boil, it really reacts quickly.
Yeah.
So we'll just stir that foam down.
Okay. And since it came to the boil, that is all we need to be able to add our acid. For a quart of milk, I like to put in about a quarter cup of vinegar, give or take, depending on how strong the vinegar is. And all I do here is I just sort of 1 or 2 times around, very lightly, make a stir just to incorporate all of that and make sure that the vinegar is evenly distributed. And you can see immediately how the vinegar is curdling the milk, how it's separating out those curds from the whey. So we just kind of let this hang out about 5-10 minutes, something like that. We'll check them here in a minute, but that's it for now.
Okay, so while the curds are forming, we have a couple minutes here and we can talk about the kind of milks to use. One thing that we've noticed is that an ultra-pasteurized milk just doesn't really seem to generate nice big curds. So a lot of the organic milks that you get in the grocery store are ultra-pasteurized, and they just don't seem to work as well.
Yeah, that ultra-pasteurization kind of breaks down the proteins, and it will say on the label. You'll be able to see if it says pasteurized or ultra-pasteurized. For this recipe, we just used a regular whole milk. Now, if you use something with less fat content than that, you are simply not going to get as much cheese. You're not going to get as much protein, as much fat content to make the substance of those curds. But for the most part, a standard store-bought whole milk that is not ultra-pasteurized does great.
Yeah, and so it's been sitting a few minutes and you can see that our curds are setting up pretty nicely.
Yeah, let's look at it, huh? So this is exactly what we want, a very clear whey and solid curds. Looks pretty good to me, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe this is a good time then to talk a little bit more about this salt. Okay, so if you have our recipe card for this recipe, or you can also find the recipe in the description of this video, you'll see that we call for having a tablespoon of salt on hand. We're actually salting to taste here, and anytime we say we're salting to taste or seasoning to taste, we always want you to have a little bit more than you think you need on hand. So you're probably thinking, though, if you read that a tablespoon of salt is a heck of a lot of salt for 1 quart of milk, and it is if you're, salting cheese just straight up. But there are a couple of methods of salting this cheese, and I think we should talk a little bit about those. So one of them that would actually necessitate using this tablespoon of salt is to just salt this way right now as the curds are forming. That's a good way to give the curds sort of nice salty flavor throughout. I think you can sort of think of it like when you cook pasta. You want to cook pasta in salted water because that will really give you a nice flavored pasta whenever you drain it. Now, one of the things that you can do with this farmer's cheese, when you drain it, you can save this whey. You can bake bread with it. You can make salad dressing with it. There are quite a few uses, but thinking ahead to how you're going to use that whey, do you want your whey to be extremely salty? If not, then maybe you don't want to salt it this way. So we're actually going to salt the curds directly, meaning we're not going to use this whole tablespoon of salt today. So maybe let's go ahead and drain the curds first, and then we'll sort of show you the salting here in a second.
Okay, so we're going to drain these curds into our fine mesh colander. And you can see that because we have that gap on the bottom, the whey is collecting underneath of the cheese for the most part. Underneath of the curds, I guess I should say.
So we're going to let that just drain into into the mixing bowl for a minute. So the first thing that we do when the curds have drained initially, and the whey is mostly gone, is we just give them a quick rinse. So I'm going to step over here and do that.
Yeah, and so you'll want to give them a quick rinse. You don't want to rinse them too much. The thing that you want to do is to just get that strong vinegar taste out of them, but you don't want that to go away entirely because that acidity gives a nice flavor to the curds.
So now we're going to salt the cheese. And we're salting to taste, but we're actually salting for a couple things here, because the other thing that the salt is going to do for us, especially over the next couple of days as we age this cheese, it's going to withdraw more of that moisture, and it's going to help it make it a firmer cheese that we can work with later on. So let's mix this up now. Just a little bit of that salt.
And since we want this to be a firmer cheese, we're gonna wrap it in a towel.
So this works really, really well. It's kind of a nice fine mesh, but there are some things that we wouldn't want to use.
Yeah, you don't want to use a terry cloth towel or anything with like a nap to it, because this cheese is just gonna get stuck in every crevice of that fabric. You can also use a butter muslin. That's nice. A cheesecloth is a little bit too loose of a weave. It just doesn't seem to work as well.
Yeah, let's wrap this up into a little ball here. And we're going to drain this a little bit further as we wrap it. So this towel is going to give it, it's going to let it hold shape, but it also it works well for us in trying to drain it more, because what we can do is we can wrap it up in this tight little ball and we can just twist here. We don't want to force it, but we can just make it kind of tight, put some pressure on it, and as we do that, it's going to let more moisture seep out. And you can kind of tell when it's done for now, because it will kind of slow to a drip. Now there's still plenty of moisture in there, so what we're going to do now is we're going to close this ball off with that clothespin that Amy pointed out earlier. And what is nice about this clothespin is you can constantly adjust this ball, right? So right now it's sort of at a pressure. It's got a little bit of pressure, not too much, but enough that is going to kind of keep lightly squeezing moisture out. I'm going to check it, maybe later this evening. I'm going to check it tomorrow, and every time there's going to be more moisture that came out, and that ball is going to be a little bit smaller. So I want to just like squeeze it a little bit more, tighten it up, and sort of readjust the positioning of my pin. We've got another little strainer here. You can use the same one used earlier, just wash it out. And we're going to set it inside a smaller bowl. Just cover it with a towel. You might want to put some plastic wrap or something over that to cover it as you keep it in the fridge. But for the same reason that we had the gap beneath the strainer in the bowl when we drain the whey, you want to do the same thing when you're draining this in the fridge, because you do not want this to continue to drain out liquid and for that ball of cheese to just be sitting in its own liquid. So this is basically it, you guys. That's all for the fresh farmer cheese. I mean, pretty simple. So we're gonna move this to the fridge.
Yeah, we're gonna clean up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna make a little bit more farmer's cheese. We're gonna take a little bit of a break while we're doing that, and when we come back, I will show you a few of these really fun ways that we like to transform this recipe. So, see you in just a sec.
And so you mentioned something about a recipe card.
I did mention something about a recipe card. So, I said on our recipe card, you will see that we list out ingredients in a certain way. What I'm talking about is this. This is for our Patreon patrons. So a lot of how we make these videos is through support that we receive from people on Patreon. And if you support us at $10 or more each month, you will get one of these slick, full color 5x7 recipe cards with every one of these featured recipe videos we do. So every month you'll get some fun mail from us. If you are a supporter, you already have one of these probably at home. And if not, follow the link in the description of this video and you can sign up there.
Yep, we appreciate the support.
You know, I said we were going back to the kitchen, but it is such a nice day outside, and after being in the kitchen all day long, I wanted to step out here and tell you about three of many ways that we use this farmer's cheese, that we take that basic recipe and make something a little bit more impressive. And I want to just point out the 3 stages of cheese that we're going to be working with. So we've got this cheese that we made a couple days ago. It is firm, it's been draining, it breaks apart really well. We've got this cheese that we made earlier today in the video. It is starting to firm up a little bit. You know, it's been in that tight little ball, that towel, for a little while. And then I made another batch of cheese just moments ago, and it is very, very soft. It's very spreadable at this point. So let's actually start with that cheese. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to make a garlic and herb spread. I roasted some garlic, minced it up pretty fine. I took some herbs from the garden, some rosemary, some thyme, gave those a pretty coarse chop, and I just mixed it all together. I've got some really delicious bread that I made some grilled toast with, and this cheese on that toast with some roasted mushrooms and some other fresh herbs from the garden, it's just so delicious. Now the cheese that we made earlier today, because it's sort of at the in-between stage, it has firmed up a little bit. This is a really good time if I want to shape it in order to make it firmer later on. So I'm actually going to try to make a sliceable disc of cheese today. And what I use for that is I use these biscuit cutter things. And I kind of pack these curds into that biscuit cutter. And I'll wrap it in a towel and put it back in the fridge, let it drain a little bit more for a couple days, but it's going to retain that shape. And after a couple days in the fridge, it is sliceable. And at that point, I try to put some kind of crust on it. Not really a rind like other cheese have, but just some kind of a coating. Herbs are good for that, but one of my favorites is this cedar ash rub that we make. It's got some cedar needles that we burn down, a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar. It actually adds quite a bit of flavor to the outside. And it just sort of has an interesting kind of contrast with the rest of the cheese, the rest of the flavor of the cheese. And with that kind of ashiness and the heavy salt of this cheese, because I salted it a little bit more in order to drain some more liquid out. That salty cheese is really nicely paired with something sweet. So here on the farm this week, we are picking loads of blueberries. So serving it with some fresh blueberries, even a little bit of blueberry preserves. And then finally, we've got that cheese that we made a couple days ago. So this is, again, they're bigger crumbles. It's a firmer cheese. So what do I do with that? Well, one of my favorite ways to use this farmer's cheese is to try to make a mock blue cheese. And this is something that took a little bit of experimentation on our part. But a couple years ago, we finally nailed it. Took just a little bit of black walnuts, a little bit of fresh sage from the garden, put that in a coffee grinder, mix it up into a fine powder. To that, we add just a little bit of fine salt, a little bit of cane sugar, and then we pour that into the crumbled cheese and reshape it. And it kind of gives it a nice marbling effect. And surprisingly, the flavors came really, really close to that of a mild blue cheese. So how do we serve this cheese? Well, this time of year we are using a lot of fresh vegetables from the garden. So some charred garlic scapes with a little bit of this mock blue cheese is just perfect for this time of year. Just 3 ideas, 3 of many ways, again, that you can use this farmer's cheese. Now, the cheese is absolutely delicious by itself. No additional flavoring needed, but it's so much fun to experiment, so much fun to play around, so I hope you will. So there you have it, a few ways of making our fresh farmer's cheese. It's been really fun.
Yeah.
And you know what? It would be awesome to hear from you guys. If you make this, tag us on Facebook, tag us on Instagram. And also, you know, we love learning as much as we love teaching. So if you have some other ways that you use farmer's cheese, you know, let us know about that. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, we'll try it out.
But thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you back here next month for another featured recipe video. Until then, thanks so much.
Yep, thanks for watching.
See you guys.
See you, bye.